Good evening and welcome to our ADL for current trends in education. This project was by Afton, Amber, and Chrissy.
Just exit.
Tonight we are going to look at and critique the article Achieving Equity in Special Education, History, Status, and Current Challenges from the Journal of Exceptional Children by Skiba, Simmons, Ritter, Gibb, Rausch, Cuadrado, and Chung. Our lead author is Russell Skiba. He has his PhD in educational psychology and is a professor in counseling and educational psychology at Indiana University. He has worked with schools across the country, directed numerous federal and state research grants, published extensively in the areas of school violence, school discipline, classroom management, and equity in education. Ada Simmons of the Indiana University co-authored several educational articles including Research versus Teaching Debate, Untangling the Relationships, The Context of Minority Disproportionality, Practitioner Perspectives on Special Education Referrals, and including others. Shanna Ritter, Indiana University, Bloomington, concentrations were in secondary education, teacher education, and teaching methods. Ashley Gibb also has contributed to newsletters such as Using Self-Monitoring Strategies to Address Behavior and Academic Issues. Rausch has a PhD and is the Vice President of Research and Evaluation, founded and served as Director of Indianapolis affiliates of Stand for Children, a national education advocacy nonprofit, and was on the leadership team of Indiana University. He has his PhD, as I said, in educational psychology and a master's degree from Indiana University. Jason Cuadrado did his dissertation on racial threats and benign neglect, an examination of minority students' overrepresentation in school discipline at the Indiana University. Chung, his areas of expertise are in education and literacy and government reform. He has contributed to several scholarly articles, including Federal Policy on Disproportionality in Special Education, Is It Moving Us Forward?, Assessing the Rationales for Educational Reforms, an examination of policy claims about professional development and comprehensive reform, and directed instruction in addition to many others.
This article serves as a status report on minority disproportionality in special education. Specifically, this article provides information on history, measurement, status, amongst other factors that could contribute to disproportionate representation in special education. By understanding these factors that lead to disproportionality, the authors are able to make recommendations for the best practices in instruction, education leadership, and academic and behavioral interventions. In one study of a large and diverse school district, 50% of African American males and 1/3 of African American females in the middle school experienced out-of-school suspensions during one school year. Rates were substantially higher than white males, which are 25%, and white females at 9.3% of middle school students. African American students with disabilities were more likely than their peers with the same disability label to be served in a separate class setting in milder, more judgmental categories, such as learning disabilities. Relative risk was 3.2, or speech and language at 7.66. Skiba et al. State that the problem of disproportionate representation of minority students in special education has persisted over time. In 1997, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA, was reauthorized to stress the importance of preventing the mislabeling and high dropout rates among minority children with disabilities. One of the major concepts that Skiba et al. Discusses is the status report on minority disproportionality in special education. Within this concept, she focuses on a few questions such as, what are the possible causes and conditions that create or maintain disproportionality and what interventions have been suggested. These authors focus on the history and current status of the field while reviewing data, hypotheses, and interventions and evaluations.
Tonight we are going to look at and critique the article Achieving Equity in Special Education, History, Status, and Current Challenges from the Journal of Exceptional Children by Skiba, Simmons, Ritter, Gibb, Rausch, Cuadrado, and Chung.
Skiba et al. Explain that facts that maintain or sustain disproportionality are complex in social and institutional practices. Even though some forms of disproportionality have been identified, there is still no literature that explains and supports the determination of racial disparity in special education. These authors believe that future research will find complex and perhaps unexpected interactions among variables that have been studied only in isolation or on a limited scale. Students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds will show academic or behavioral problems at a higher rate, which may make them more likely to be considered by teachers as appropriate candidates for special education services. In order to help improve the referral process of students, Klinger et al. States that it will be necessary to develop and implement approaches specifically designed to be culturally responsive. These new interventions may not only focus on improving the students' academic and behavior concerns, but also use to reduce measured inequity. Continued monitoring of data is critical in intervention efforts to have significant impact on the concerns for disproportionate representation by race and ethnicity. One example that Skiba et al. Discussed was Gravios and Rosenfield, which showed implementation of instructional consultation teams was helpful in reducing both referral and placements for special education, along with disproportionality in referral and services. Skiba et al. Finds that the data shows racial and ethnic disparities in special education are not completely a special education problem, but are also educational inequity in general education, such as curriculum, classroom management, teaching, and resource quality and availability. Students who were referred for special education because they did not receive quality special education or effective classroom management were inappropriately identified and given inappropriate tests to identify if there is a special education need. Overall, Skiba et al. State that there is still a lot of work that needs to be done for the disproportionality of minority students identified for special education to be erased. Despite court challenges and federal reports on the issue, the disproportionate representation of minority students in special education has persisted in the United States. While this problem of disproportionality has been clearly documented for years, there is still no direct or clear comprehensive picture as to why it occurs. The reauthorization of IDEA, also known as Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, occurred in 1997 and again in 2004. The act was brought about to prevent the intensification of problems that occurred in schools with misleading students as special education, and also to prevent high dropout rates amongst these minority students. At the district level, it is important to assess the needs for new policies that will help develop new assessments, provide teacher training, as well as special education trainings. Similar to the district level, it is important at the school level to provide teacher support resources as well as additional trainings that will be beneficial to these teachers. For teacher practice, don't assume there is a problem or an issue without getting to know your students. As a teacher, it is very important you know the student in school as well as out of school. Get to know your students and their family backgrounds so that you're better prepared to help their situation. Skiba et al. Makes a point that it is not surprising that America's history of race still remains in our consciousness, actions, and institutions. Again, there is still more research and work needed to be reviewed and analyzed for the disproportionality of minority students identified for special education to be erased.
Our professional critique is that the authors compiled a lot of great research, although there were a lot of similarities in repeating subjects. The word disproportionality was used very frequently throughout the article, and it would have been nice to hear an alternative word used. The article was hard to follow at times and seemed to jump around from one idea to the next. And as well, the authors gave no real solution to the issues, just brought all the research together, making it more concise and basically a review of the information rather than a solution. We would like to have heard the author's rationale or reasoning and how they would reduce the disproportionate identification of minority students in special education rather than just a compilation of research. Mm-hmm.
A couple questions or thoughts for you guys to think about. Skiba et al. Created a whole list of issues. What do you see as being some of the most significant reasons for the disproportionality? How would you resolve this issue of disproportionality in schools? How do you see addressing these types of issues in your future or current classrooms?
Tonight we are going to look at and critique the article Achieving Equity in Special Education, History